Here's a good question that I think a lot of people can relate to. Um, what's interesting to me is the people that can't relate to this. And there really are people that can't relate to this. It always kind of surprises me. I mean, we can explain it. We know what to do with it. We know the problems it causes. We know how it happens. We know when it's healthy. We know when it's not. But it's hard to relate to. Anyway, here it is. How do you recommend not being so hard on yourself? What I meant was there's some people that just not hard on themselves. Okay, I guess the water they drink is different. Um, well, generally speaking, generally speaking, we there's a lot of factors that go into this. There's not one thing that determines being hard on yourself. I'm going to start with the three or four big ones. Number one is that you are human. Now, whether you are a theologically inclined person or not, meaning that you have a faith that interprets life in the way that I see it through the scriptures, maybe you're just a psychologically aware person, that what you will find is that what the Bible says is true. Whether or not you believe in the ultimate truth of it or not, the truth that it's speaking about is true. And that tends to basically say what the scriptures says is that all humans are born under judgment. That's an existential reality of this universe, that there is a standard that is in our DNA that we live under, a sense of oughtness, right? That things ought to be like this, and I ought to be like this, and you ought to be like this. And we have a standard. And even the most, it's like C.S. Lewis said, some people say, well, I'm tolerant of everybody. He says, well, yeah, they say that until you go punch them in the nose and then see how tolerant they are, right? Even their physical self is going to react and not tolerate that. It judges it. So the whole human race, the Bible says, because we fell from perfection where there was no judgment, we fell and now we're under judgment. So we sit under this cloud of judgment. Now, that cloud of judgment is about the gap between where we are and where we ought to be. Now, that refers to ourselves, it refers to other people, it also refers to the world around us. One of the famous lines in the whole self-help genre of the universe was Scott Peck's opening line in the book The Road Less Traveled. The opening line said this: life is difficult, period. And then it said this: once you understand this, then life becomes much less difficult. Meaning this, that if we don't accept the reality that things aren't perfect, life's not perfect, you're not perfect, and I'm not perfect, if we don't accept that reality, we are going to be too hard on ourselves. Because it's going to be a demand. So when I wake up every morning, hopefully, I have an understanding I'm going to go through the day, and there's going to be some moments I'm not as good as I should be. I fall short. And when that happens, what that does is it equips me to normalize it. And see when I have a thought I wish I didn't have, or I have a reaction I wish I didn't have, or I don't follow through on something like, gosh, I should have done that, I didn't, or whatever it is, that I'm going to accept that reality, and I'm not going to respond to myself by an unreality, which is to say, well, you shouldn't be that way. Well, yes and no. I violated an ought, I violated a should, But at the same time, what the Bible says and what all of psychology will tell us is that there will be times when I don't get it right, and that doesn't make it right, but it also helps me accept the fact that I'm imperfect and I'm going to fail. And there's a remedy for that. It's called forgiveness. So the remedy, after we accept that we're going to make mistakes, is to make ourselves available to forgiveness. And once you begin to do that, and see, people, it's hard for people to feel forgiven if they don't take that first step. If you're still in denial about that you're somebody that can make mistakes, then you're under a demand to never make a mistake and you just get beat up every time you do. But if you can accept what the Bible says and what every good psychologist would tell you, gosh, we're on a theme today about psychology and science and the Bible saying the same thing. If you can get over way back to the original cognitive therapists, kind of, Albert Ellis, stop shoulding on yourself and the shoulds and the oughts and the musts and the have tos and that it's intolerable and all those extreme judgments. You got to get over that first, then you can accept them. But see, that leads you to confession, and it leads you to agreeing with somebody, gosh, I made a mistake here, and then they can forgive you. And once you're forgiven 10,463 times, I think that's the right number. I'm pretty sure that's the right number. Guess what happens? That judgment inside begins to lessen because now you've internalized a new voice that we're not born with, and that's the voice of grace. And what the Bible says, and what psychology affirms, is that as we grow in grace, meaning as we experientially grow in having people accept our imperfections and our failures, then that bullet shooting gun inside of us begins to grow as well. It begins to be less harsh. So I mentioned 3 or 4 of these. I'm going to race through a couple more and then we got to stop. But the second one is, a lot of times, not only are we born with a critical voice in our head, but also you have parenting, or you have authority figures, or you have people in your life, or relationships, or husbands or wives or whoever, or bosses that reinforce that. And they're hard on you. And now those voices come in to live on the inside of our heads. And those voices that we got from the outside will now be doubly hard on us. So what's the remedy? Well, we got to name those voices. You say, well, that's not true. That's my mother. Or that's my father. Or that's my brother or my sister or whoever. And we get it out there and get the judgment out there. I was talking with somebody the other day and they were talking about, well, everybody just looks at it like blah, 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 blah in the family. And I said, everybody? And they go, yeah, well, that's how they look at my failure in this way or whatever. I go, who? And then they say, well, my mom, blah, 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 blah. I go, I know your mom does. We talked about that, but who else? Your brother does it. Your sister does it. Your dad does it. Your grandmother does it. They've all reached out. But see, until they've dealt specifically with mom, it's not going to be specific. It's going to be generalized to the whole world. And very subjectively, in an all or nothing fashion, the whole world's going to think that I'm bad. So you have to name those voices, and then you have to get into internalizing new voices. We internalize these. I remember I was treating a little girl one time and doing some play therapy, and she knocked over her glass on the coffee table in the office. And as soon as she knocked over the glass, she goes, "Oh, bad girl, bad girl, bad girl, bad girl, bad girl, bad girl." And she started pounding her head like that. Well, this was a child that had been treated that way. And all she's doing is repeating the voices that had been put inside of her. It was interesting. Not too long after that, I'm treating another child who knocked something over with. She goes, "Oops, made a mistake," picked it up. But where'd that come from? Well, that's how her parents related to her making mistakes. See, we internalize a lot of this stuff. So that's got to be healed as well. And then one of my favorite verses, times 10,000, is we've got to begin to look at ourselves like God looks at us. Because that's how children learn to look at themselves, how their parents look at them, like the second little girl or like the first little girl. Who is your God? I find the gods that we make up are much more difficult than the one that truly is, because he understands. Let me give you a few of my favorite verses. Speaking of Jesus, the book of Hebrews says, "We do not have a high priest who can't sympathize with our weaknesses, because he himself has been tempted in all things, yet without sin." He knows, because he came and he walked the life. He knows how hard it is, and he can sympathize. How about this one? Here's another one. He is perfecting those who have already been made perfect. Did you get that? That's what the Bible says, that he is perfecting those who have already been made perfect. What? I'm making mistakes, and he's helping me get better while I'm imperfect because he's already made me perfect? Yeah, that's what it says. So, in other words, if you have come to faith in the forgiveness of Jesus, what he says is, I am going to see you as you literally are in my brain, which is you're 100% forgiven. There's no being hard on you. You've already been made perfect. Now, let's start to walk into how I already see you. Oh my gosh, why can't parents do that? See your kid as a wonderful, successful, one day person and then help them to get there. Give you another example. Psalm 103. There's some my God who forgives all of my transgressions, because he knows that we are but dust. He doesn't have perfectionistic expectations of us because he knows how broken and screwed up we are. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have expectations. He's just not critical and hard and harsh about them. He still wants us to get there. He's not licentious. He's not enabling. He's just accepting and empowering. And then one of my other favorites. Boy, we could talk about this one a long time, this topic. But it's fascinating. Next time you get rocked out by one of your failures, think about this. Peter had been walking with Jesus for 3 years, I guess. And then Jesus says, it's describing all the stuff he's got to go through. And Peter goes through and says, "Oh, not you, Lord," and all that kind of stuff. And then Peter says this. He says, Lord, I would, I'd do anything for you, right? I would die for you. I'd go anywhere, whatever you want me, kind of, I'm all in. And Jesus said, you know, before the cock crows 3 times, or before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter goes, no, I would never do that. I'm not going to do that. I would never do that. But then Jesus said this. I want you to think about this in terms of your life. Peter had not screwed up yet. Jesus is looking down the corridor of the next few days and sees how he's going to screw up. And then he says to them, you're going to screw up. But then he says this, but after you have returned, you will become a source of strength for many. So what did he just say? Peter, you're going to fail. I can see it. I wish it weren't true, but I see it. You're gonna screw up. But no biggie. Because after you've kind of figured it out, you're gonna help a lot of people. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost and now I'm found. Think about that. He knows you're going to fail. And he still sees a future and hope. So that's what I mean by, you want to get over this, get in touch with the God who is instead of the God we make up.